So Washington State did actually pass the rent control bill on May 7th. It's House Bill 1217. I'm going to have a link in the description to it down below if you want to check it out yourself, but we're going to look over it right here. Yeah, this is rent control, and it's going to lead to some dystopian stuff eventually. These rent control things are horrible. Maybe won't outlast a court challenge. We don't know yet. Obviously, it just happened. And also, it's effective immediately. So right now is in place, and the restrictions on what landlords and owners can do, and property management companies, of course, is now effective immediately. Unfortunately, one of the things that I see as a real negative to this bill, and please leave a comment below, tell me what I missed, because there's probably a lot of negatives. Obviously, it just makes it harder and harder to manage your own properties. There's a penalty clause in here that's basically the government giving a new weapon to tenants to take out owners and property managers. That sort of changes the game a lot. But a couple things. Number one, this is going to limit the amount of money that obviously owners can spend on maintenance of properties. They're limited on their rent increases if they have to catch up. Then they don't have as much money available if they want to catch up. And I have a lot of owners that keep their tenants at a low rent on purpose. Now, the problem is if it's a multifamily, even a single family, well, most bigger on multifamilies, of course, when you sell a property, you sell it according to the income stream. That's what it's worth. It's not worth more because the windows are slightly bigger than the building next door. What's the income stream on that building? And if you have a bunch of leases that are substantially below market rate, yeah, there's room for a new owner to raise rents and increase his equity position, but that takes time and effort to do that. Someone makes an offer on your multifamily property, they are going to be they're looking at what the current rents are, the income stream, and they're going to base their offer on that. That's what it's worth. Now, of course, on a single family house, there's the upside of the fact that it's a single family house and it has some benefits there, but it's sort of the same thing in effect, in that I'm going to be recommending owners start increasing their rents every year, basically, because if you get behind with a tenant and they're a long-term tenant, and we have tenants in properties that have been there 15 years, it's hard to catch back up with the market, and it takes time, and you could be trailing that over time. So it sort of guarantees an incentive for owners to start raising their rents every year just to keep up with market increases. And if you look over time, rents are basically always going up. And unfortunately, tenants always pay for everything. That's where the money comes from. So this is going to be something that impacts tenants negatively with guaranteed rent increases, less maintenance on their properties, and more notices and basically things in the mail and taped to their door. So let's go right over the bill and I'll tell you about it. By the way, my name's Brian Johnson. I'm a real estate broker and senior property manager here in Spokane with Windermere Lease Source. My contact information is right here. Don't leave a voicemail. That just is a dystopian hell for me. Just leave me a text message if you want to ask me any questions. I'm happy to help. So here is the bill itself. Let's just go ahead and go right down here past all this stuff. So right down here on page 3, we're looking at the summary of the amended bill. Unless an exemption applies, a landlord is prohibited from increasing the rent of a tenant subject to the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, regardless of the length of their lease, in an amount greater than 10% plus the Consumer Price Index as of April 1st of the current year, as published by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay, basically 10% plus some CPI number that you have to go hunt down from the government. Unless an exemption applies, then landlord is prohibited from increasing the rent for a tenant subject to MHLTA, which is the Mobile Manufactured Home Landlord-Tenant Act, regardless of the length of their lease, in an amount of greater than 5% during any 12-month period, or by any amount during the first 12 months after the tenancy begins, and that would be month to month also. Here are the exemptions to the rent increase notice in dwelling units subject to the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act, where the first certificate of occupancy was issued 15 or fewer years before the date of the notice of the rent increase. Okay, so sort of newer construction doesn't really count. During the first 12 months after the qualified sale of a manufactured or mobile home community to an eligible organization whose mission aligns with the preservation and affordability of the MHC, in dwelling units owned or mobile homes operated by public housing, tenancies, and certain low-income housing developments, for certain single-family residential properties, certain owner-occupied rentals, an owner-occupied rental. So you're living in one side, maybe you're renting out rooms. That's something we're going to need to look into. Reach out to us, reach out to your property manager about that. Or when a rental agreement subject to the mobile home manufactured home is transferred due to the sale of the home, and the landlord has the option, after giving notice to the purchaser prior to the transfer, to make a one-time increase in the amount not limited by the 5% cap at the time of the first renewal. Okay. So now here are the notice requirements that are coming into play statewide. Now, if you're in the city of Spokane, we actually have notices that are further out than this. So city of Spokane is not affected by this because it's already worse, but this is everything outside the city of Spokane. A landlord must provide tenants with written notice of rent increases. If a landlord claims an exemption from the rent and fee increase limit, the landlord must include a statement describing the exemption. The landlord must provide each affected tenant a minimum 90 days prior written notice of an increase in rent in the residential side, or 3-month, same thing, well, but it's written differently, a 3-month notice requirement for rent increases for mobile home manufactured home. If a tenant whose rental agreement under the residential was entered or renewed before the effective date of the act and agreement has more than 60 days but less than 90 days left before the end of the specified date, the landlord must provide the tenant with a minimum of 60 days before the effective date. So I think that's if we're caught in the middle right now on notices that have already gone out, because the bill is effective immediately, but the notices were sent under the previous law. Tenant lease termination. Now, this is what I said earlier. What's the bullet the government gave to the tenants? We would hope that, tenants are on one side and owners are on the other side, and the government's in the middle calling the shots and being fair. Well, it's not that way anymore. The tenants are over on this side with the government on that side with them, and they just handed them basically a nice little weapon, with the owners and landlords or property managers over here receiving that. So here's what that is. If a landlord increases the rent above the 10% plus limit and 5% for mobile homes without providing a qualifying exemption, the tenant must offer the landlord an opportunity to cure the unauthorized rent increase by providing a written demand to reduce the increase to an amount that complies with the limit. Okay. And may terminate a rental agreement at any time by providing the landlord with at least 20 days of written notice under the residential side or 30 days written notice under the mobile home side, in combination with other remedies. When terminating a rental agreement under these circumstances, the tenant only owes rent for the full month in which the tenant vacates the dwelling unit or manufactured or mobile home lot, and the landlord is prohibited from charging the tenant any fines or fees for terminating the rental agreement. So you make a mistake and you're off by 1 day. Instead of being able just simply to correct the mistake and be able to continue with the legal contract that courts are supposed to enforce with a tenant, now the tenant can just say, well, our contract's over, we're out of here. It kills the contract. Okay. We'll see if that survives a legal challenge, but it's effective immediately. So other tenant protections under the mobile home side, move-in fees and security deposits combined may not exceed 1 month's rent. Unless the tenant has pets, then the combined amount may not exceed 2 months' rent. Tenant deposits paid as security deposit for performance shall be deposited in trust for the tenant, and then the interest shall be paid to the landlord unless otherwise agreed upon. And late fees for rent more than 5 days past due may not exceed 2% of the tenant's total rent per month during the first month that rent is past due, 3% during the second month is past due, and 5% during the third month. So it's a maximum penalty for late payments under the mobile home manufacturer side. On the residential side, landlords subject to the RLTA are prohibited from including terms or conditions in the rental agreement that are more burdensome to a tenant for a month-to-month rental agreement than for a longer-term rental agreement. Okay, so offering, basically, here's an offer of a month-to-month with these certain terms, but here's certain terms on a year-long lease. You can't offer different terms. And here's the next part. Must provide parity between lease types with respect to the amount of rent charged, with parity being no more than 5% difference in rent depending on the type of rental agreement offered. So I would assume that that means if you were offering a tenant basically a month-to-month tenancy at $1,000, then you could also offer them a year-long lease at $1,050, or vice versa. Sign a year-long lease for whatever. It sounds like that's what they're saying. There can be a 5% difference between the rent increase depending on the type of agreement offered. So let's talk about the enforcement. A tenant or the Attorney General's office may bring a court action to enforce compliance. If a court finds that a landlord violated the provisions of the act, the court must award the tenant damages in the amount of any excess rent, fees, or costs paid by the tenant, mandatory damages equal to 3 months of any unlawful rents, fees, or other costs charged by the landlord, and reasonable attorney's fees and costs to whoever brought the action. The Attorney General may bring an action regardless of whether the tenant has offered the landlord an opportunity to cure, and may recover civil penalties of not more than $7,500 for each violation, in addition to other remedies provided by the Act. The Attorney General may issue written civil investigative demands for pertinent documents, answers to written interrogatories, or oral testimony as required to investigate or bring action. And there is one other little happy provision at the very end. The Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee must provide an analysis of housing market trends, tenant stability and turnover, and an evaluation of social vulnerability impacts, that's pretty subjective, of the Act to appropriate legislative committees of the legislative grade. They're going to be accountable within 10 years of the effective date of the Act. So they have a decade to basically write a report.